The colony had been peaceful for years. Nestled on a distant planet, it was a place where humans lived in harmony, farming, building, and expanding their little corner of the galaxy. But all of that changed when a strange object crashed near the outskirts. At first, it was just a speck in the sky, a flash of light streaking through the atmosphere. But as it came closer, it became clear. This was no ordinary meteor. The object was controlled, spiraling downward toward the planet with purpose. Jonathan, the leader of the colony, stood on the watchtower with a small group of his men. They had been monitoring the skies for months, but nothing had ever prepared them for this. "That's no asteroid," one of the scouts muttered. "It's slowing down." The object made a sharp turn just before impact, landing in the thick forest beyond the colony's borders. The explosion that followed shook the ground, sending dust and debris into the air. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He immediately ordered a search party to head out to the crash site. His instincts told him this wasn't a random crash. It felt like a warning. By the time Jonathan and his group arrived at the wreckage, it was clear the object wasn't from any human fleet. It looked like a craft designed for speed, sleek and alien, with glowing lines running along its surface. The air around it was charged, crackling with energy, and the heat from the wreckage was intense. Jonathan motioned for his team to stay back. They could see something, or someone, moving inside the wreck. It was a woman. Her skin was an eerie shade of blue, almost glowing under the setting sun. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow, and her body battered by the crash. Her eyes fluttered open as Jonathan approached. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered in a voice that sent chills down his spine. Jonathan froze. The words were clear, but the meaning behind them was impossible to grasp. The woman seemed confused, her eyes focusing on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Her alien features were unlike anything he had ever seen. Her small, elf-like ears twitched as she tried to sit up, though she was clearly in pain. He stepped forward carefully, unsure of what to do. "Who are you?" he asked softly, trying not to startle her further. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around as though scanning the area. Finally, her gaze settled back on him. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious exhaustion. "And you, human, are the one I've been waiting for." Jonathan's mind raced. Who was she? Why had she crashed here? And why had she specifically been waiting for him? He signaled for his team to help her. They gently lifted her from the wreckage and carried her back to the colony. As they walked, the questions swirled in Jonathan's mind. But one thing was clear. This alien woman was more than just a random visitor. She had arrived for a reason. But what was it? And more importantly, why had she waited for him? The colony was buzzing with activity as the news of the crash spread like wildfire. People gathered in small groups, exchanging whispers, their faces filled with worry. A mysterious alien woman had arrived, and with her, uncertainty and fear. The peaceful life they had known for so long was now under threat. Jonathan paced back and forth in his office, his mind heavy with questions. He had ordered Lyra to be brought to the medical facility, where she would be treated for her injuries. But even as he worked to keep the colony calm, a sense of unease crept over him. What did Lyra mean when she said she'd been waiting for him? Why did she look so familiar? He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something beyond the crash. Outside, a crowd had gathered near the medical building. People whispered nervously, casting anxious glances toward the door as if expecting the worst. The colony's commander, Captain Foster, was already there, speaking to the soldiers and trying to keep order. But Jonathan could see the tension in his eyes. "Is she dangerous?" Captain Foster asked, his voice low. Jonathan hesitated. He had been in countless situations, but nothing like this. "I don't know," he admitted, "but she doesn't seem hostile." Foster gave him a hard look, his brow furrowing. "A lot of people out there are scared. They don't trust her, Jonathan. An alien woman crashes down from the sky, and says she's been waiting for you. That's not something anyone can just ignore. Jonathan knew the captain was right. Fear was spreading fast. It wasn't just the soldiers or the people in the colony's leadership. Even the children in the streets were starting to whisper about the strange woman with blue skin. It was clear that trust in Lyra wasn't something they could take for granted. As the hours passed, Jonathan made his way to the medical building, hoping to find some answers. He entered the room where Lyra lay, still recovering from her injuries. Her breathing was steady now, and she was sitting up, her pale blue skin contrasting against the sterile white sheets of the bed. Her eyes met his as he walked in. "Are you feeling better?" he asked, trying to sound reassuring. She nodded slowly. "I will heal quickly. I've been through worse." Her voice was calm, almost detached, as though she had faced far more difficult situations than what she was currently experiencing. Jonathan sat down beside her, his mind racing with the mysteries surrounding her. "You said you've been waiting for me. What do you mean by that?" Lyra looked at him with an unreadable expression. "The galaxy is vast, Jonathan. There are many forces at work, and not all of them are good. I came here because I have seen the future, and you play a key role in it. I've waited for this moment for a long time. The time has come." Jonathan couldn't understand it. "The future? What are you talking about? What role do I play in all this?" Lyra's eyes darkened, and for the first time, there was a hint of something. Fear, perhaps, in her voice. "The future of this world. And your people. You must trust me. The danger is closer than you think." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known that the galaxy was a dangerous place, full of unknowns. But this felt different. Lyra wasn't just an alien woman who had crashed on their world. She was part of something much larger, something that could change everything. Outside the medical building, the fear continued to spread. The people were waiting for answers, but all Jonathan had was more questions. And the longer he waited, the more uncertain the future seemed. The next few days passed in a blur. Jonathan couldn't shake the weight of what Lyra had said. The colony was on edge, and his mind raced with her cryptic words. "The future of this world, and your people. You must trust me." Every time he tried to focus, those words echoed in his thoughts, demanding answers he didn't have. The colony's council met daily, debating what to do about Lyra. Some of the leaders wanted to lock her away, unsure of what she might be capable of. Others wanted to use her knowledge, believing she could be the key to unlocking new technology or alliances. But Jonathan remained undecided. He couldn't bring himself to believe she was a threat, but he didn't fully understand her either. Who was she really, and why had she chosen him? One afternoon, Jonathan returned to the medical facility, hoping for some clarity. Lyra was sitting up, her gaze distant, as if she was lost in thought. Her alien features were striking. Her pale blue skin and small elf-like ears seemed even more out of place among the humans. Yet there was something about her that made Jonathan want to trust her, even though he barely knew her. "Lyra," Jonathan began, sitting across from her, "I need to know more. About you. About the future you spoke of. What is this prophecy you mentioned?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, she seemed truly present. She sighed deeply, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the blanket. "The Aetheri are an ancient race, Jonathan. We have watched the universe for millennia, protecting it from the forces that seek to destroy it. Our people have foreseen many events, but there was always one prophecy that stood above the rest." Jonathan leaned forward, his curiosity growing. "What prophecy?" Lyra's voice lowered, almost as if speaking the words aloud might make them too real. "It speaks of a time when the galaxy would fall into chaos. A war would ravage the stars, and countless civilizations would be destroyed. But there is one who will rise, someone who will unite the fragmented worlds and bring peace. A human." Jonathan's heart raced. "You mean me?" Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes, you. You are the one the prophecy speaks of. The human who will bridge the gap between the Aetheri and the other species. You will lead us through the darkness." Jonathan sat back, struggling to process the weight of her words. The human who will bring peace. He had always thought of himself as a simple leader of a colony, managing crops and trade, not as the key figure in a galactic prophecy. It seemed impossible, yet Lyra's words carried a conviction that made him doubt his own disbelief. "But why me? What makes me so special?" he asked. Lyra's expression softened, and she studied him carefully. "You may not see it yet, but you possess something unique, a strength that your kind has always had. It's not just your physical abilities, it's your resilience, your refusal to accept defeat. Even now, you are struggling with the fear of the unknown, but you are not giving up. That is the key." Jonathan's mind whirled. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep the colony united in the face of challenges, but this was something entirely different. Could he really be the one to save the galaxy? Before he could speak, Lyra continued, "There are others, Jonathan, forces that have been manipulating the galaxy's power structures for centuries. They will stop at nothing to control the stars. But you, with the Aethery by your side, can defeat them. Together, we can protect the future." As Lyra spoke, a sense of purpose began to settle over Jonathan. The future seemed terrifying, but for the first time, he saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe the galaxy's fate wasn't as hopeless as he'd thought. And maybe, just maybe, he was the one who could change it all. The days that followed Lyra's explanation were filled with tension. Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about the prophecy. He had always considered himself a leader of the colony, a simple man guiding people through the challenges of survival on a distant world. But now, the weight of something much larger pressed on him. The galaxy's fate, according to Lyra, rested on his shoulders. He tried to act normal, but it wasn't easy. The colony was on edge, and people were questioning everything. Some were frightened by the alien woman with the pale blue skin, others were curious, and a few were even eager to see what she could offer. But fear spread faster than curiosity. The alien ships that had arrived with Lyra were still in orbit, visible on the horizon, and many saw them as a sign of impending doom. At the daily council meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, his mind on Lyra and the future she spoke of. He glanced at Captain Foster, who was waiting for him to speak. The room was filled with uneasy silence. "We need to make a decision," Foster said, his voice firm but filled with worry. "The colony can't stay in this state of uncertainty forever. We need to act, and fast. People are scared." Jonathan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I know. We can't let fear control us. But we also can't ignore the truth of what's happening." He paused, looking around the room at the other council members. "Lyra came here with a warning, a prophecy. I know it sounds unbelievable, but we need to take it seriously." One of the council members, a woman named Sarah, spoke up. "You expect us to trust her? She's an alien. We've had enough of that in the past. What's to say she's not here to take over?" Jonathan's patience was wearing thin. "She's not here to take over. She saved us during the attack. And she's here for a reason. We're not just dealing with a single threat to our colony. We're dealing with something much bigger. She's told me things that no one could have known. Things that explain what's been happening in the galaxy. We need to hear her out." Foster shifted in his seat, his expression hard to read. "And if she's wrong, what then?" Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his voice more forceful now. "We can't afford to ignore the possibility that she's right. If we do nothing, we risk everything. We risk our people, our way of life. We can't let that happen." The room fell silent again. Everyone seemed to be weighing the situation. Finally, Foster spoke, his voice quieter this time. "So, what do you suggest we do?" Jonathan looked around the table, his resolve firming. "We have to unite. We have to trust Lyra. She says we can stop what's coming. But we need to act fast. We need to prepare for whatever is coming next." The decision was made. but not everyone was happy with it. As the meeting ended, Jonathan left the room with a heavy heart. He knew that by backing Lyra, he was making himself a target, not just for the enemy forces, but for the people of his own colony. Fear was powerful, and some were already plotting against the decision he had made. As he walked back to the medical facility to see Lyra, he couldn't help but wonder if they were making a mistake. But deep down, he knew he had no choice. The galaxy's fate was on the line, and he was the only one who could do something about it. When he entered the room, Lyra was waiting for him, her eyes steady as ever. "You've made the right choice," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Jonathan nodded, but doubt still lingered in his heart. "I hope so." The colony had barely recovered from the tension of the council meeting when the first attack came. Jonathan was walking through the streets, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. People were still talking in hushed tones, nervous about the future. There was no going back now. He had made the decision to trust Lyra, and he knew it was the right one, but the weight of his choice hung heavy on his shoulders. Every step felt like it carried the burden of the galaxy's future. Suddenly, the sirens blared, cutting through the air with a shrill, piercing sound. Panic spread through the streets like wildfire. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. The attack had come sooner than he expected. "Captain Foster, what's going on?" Jonathan shouted as he ran to the watchtower. Foster, already in position, was scanning the sky through binoculars. "There are ships in orbit." "They're not human," he replied, his voice tense. "They've come for us." Jonathan's stomach tightened. He knew this was a possibility, but seeing it happen was different. Lyra's warning had been clear. The enemies she spoke of weren't far behind, but the reality of an invasion was harder to face than he'd imagined. "We need to prepare the defenses," Jonathan ordered, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The colony's defenses were basic, nothing compared to the weapons the alien ships were likely carrying. But they had walls, turrets, and a few fighter ships. It would have to be enough. As the first alien ship descended, Jonathan could see its size. Huge, like a dark shadow covering the sky. It wasn't like anything they had seen before. The design was sleek, with sharp angles and a dark, metallic surface that reflected the dim light of the sun. It hovered just above the colony, ominously silent for a moment. Then, without warning, a barrage of energy blasts rained down, striking the outskirts of the colony. The explosions were deafening, sending shockwaves through the ground. Buildings crumbled, and the sound of panicked shouts filled the air. "Get to cover," Foster barked, pulling Jonathan away from the open ground. "We're going to need more firepower if we're going to stand a chance." Jonathan ran with Foster, the sounds of destruction all around them. The colony was under attack, and there was nothing they could do to stop it without help. "Lyra," Jonathan shouted as he spotted her moving through the chaos, her calm demeanor standing out among the panic-stricken people. She had already begun to move toward the center of the colony, her eyes focused on the enemy ships. "Lyra," Jonathan called again, reaching her just as she was about to enter the command center. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Jonathan, the time has come," she said, her voice low but firm. "You need to trust me. I can stop them, but I need you to lead your people." Jonathan didn't hesitate. He had trusted her before, and now was no different. "Do it. Whatever you need, just stop them." Without another word, Lyra raised her arms, her body glowing faintly as she focused all her energy on the enemy ships above. The ground beneath them trembled as a powerful force surged through the air, crackling with energy. Jonathan watched in awe as Lyra's power expanded, wrapping around the alien ships like an invisible shield. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the ships began to lift, as if caught in an unseen grip. With a sudden burst of energy, Lyra sent them flying back into the sky, causing them to retreat. Jonathan stood frozen, his eyes wide. "You did it," he whispered, almost in disbelief. Lyra lowered her arms, breathing heavily. "This is only the beginning." They will return. And next time, they will come with more. Jonathan felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew the battle was far from over. The enemies were still out there, and they wouldn't stop. But Lyra had proven that they weren't powerless. Together, they had the strength to fight back. But for how long? The attack had been repelled, but the sense of relief was short-lived. The alien ships had retreated for now, but Jonathan knew they would be back, and the damage to the colony was already done. The once thriving community now lay in ruins, the streets littered with debris, and the people shaken to their core. Fear had gripped the hearts of those who once believed they were safe. Jonathan stood in the command center, surrounded by his team. Captain Foster was reviewing the damage reports while the other officers spoke in low voices. But Jonathan's thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. She had saved them, yes, but what did that really mean? The enemy was still out there, and Lyra's powers, while impressive, didn't seem like they would be enough to hold off an entire invasion. "Captain, we need to get everyone ready," Jonathan said, turning to Foster. "This was only a test. The real fight is coming." Foster nodded, his face grim. "We've got our best defenses in place, but it's not enough. We need something more, something stronger." Jonathan's mind raced. He had to find a way to get the people of the colony to see that the prophecy Lyra spoke of wasn't just some far-off dream. It was real. They needed to trust her, and they needed to trust him too. He turned and walked to Lyra's quarters. When he entered, he found her sitting by the window, her gaze distant, lost in thought. She hadn't said much after the battle, but Jonathan knew she was struggling too. The weight of everything they had just faced was heavy for both of them. "You did it," Jonathan said softly as he approached her. "You stopped them, but we both know this is far from over." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. "This is just the beginning, Jonathan. The enemies you face are not just coming for your colony, they are coming for everything. For the galaxy itself." Jonathan sat down across from her, leaning forward. "You said something about a prophecy. You told me I was part of it. What exactly does that mean? How am I supposed to stop this?" Lyra took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to share something important. "The prophecy is ancient. It speaks of a time when the galaxy would be plunged into darkness, when the forces of destruction would rise and threaten all civilizations. But there is one who can stop it. A human, born with the strength to lead, to unite the fractured worlds. That human is you, Jonathan." Jonathan stared at her, his mind trying to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. "Me? I'm just a leader of a small colony. I'm not some hero." "You underestimate yourself," Lyra said, her voice firm but kind. "The strength you have is not just in your ability to lead a colony. It is your heart, your will, your resilience. You are a symbol of hope, and that hope is what will unite the galaxy in the fight against what's coming." Jonathan's head was spinning. He had never seen himself as a symbol of hope, and the idea of leading a galactic war seemed impossible. But Lyra's words carried weight, and deep down, he knew there was truth to them. "How do I do this?" he asked quietly. Lyra stood and walked over to the small table where a map of the galaxy lay spread out. She pointed to several locations, each marked with symbols of alien races and factions. "You must unite the galaxy's factions. There are many races, Jonathan, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. But they are divided. By fear, by distrust, by past wars. You must convince them to stand together." Jonathan followed her finger as she traced the path across the map. "And if I fail?" Lyra turned to face him, her expression unwavering. "You won't fail. Not if you trust in the strength that lies within you. But the time to act is now. The darkness is growing, and only you can stop it." The weight of her words settled on Jonathan like a heavy cloak. He wasn't just leading a colony anymore. He was leading the future of the galaxy itself. He stood, determination filling his chest. The future was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't do it alone. "I'll do it," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "I'll unite them. I'll bring them together." Lyra gave him a small, knowing smile. "Good. Together, we can make a difference." Jonathan stood in front of the council room, his heart pounding. The task ahead was enormous. He had to unite the galaxy's most powerful and diverse factions, each with its own history and goals. The fear of failure hung heavy in the air, but Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "You are the one who can do this." The task was clear: convince the leaders of each race that they needed to work together to fight the forces that threatened them all. But as Jonathan looked at the map in front of him, the reality of the situation started to settle in. The galaxy was vast. Its civilization spread far and wide. The races were divided, each one dealing with their own issues. Some were at war, others were isolated, and a few were simply too proud to ever consider an alliance. "Captain Foster, have the ships ready for departure," Jonathan said, his voice steady, but with a hint of urgency. "We leave for the Zorathian system in the morning." Foster nodded but couldn't hide the concern in his eyes. "You're really going through with this, huh?" "Convincing the Zorathians. They've always been distrustful of outsiders." Jonathan understood the captain's skepticism. The Zorathians were known for their deep-seated pride and isolation. They had fiercely protected their territory for centuries, and no one had ever managed to breach their defenses, let alone get them to join a galactic alliance. "I don't have a choice," Jonathan replied. "The future of the galaxy depends on us all working together. If the Zorathians won't listen, then we will find a way to make them understand. But we have to try." Later that day, Jonathan boarded the ship with Lyra, Captain Foster, and a small crew. As the ship soared into the stars, Jonathan couldn't help but feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders. His people, his colony, depended on him. The stakes were high, too high to fail. As they approached the Zorathian homeworld, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A deep, rumbling voice came through, speaking in a language Jonathan didn't understand. Lyra stood beside him, translating the message in real time. "They want us to land," she said, her face serious. "But they're not welcoming. It's a challenge, Jonathan. They want to see if we're truly worthy of their time." Jonathan clenched his fists, taking a deep breath. The Zorathians didn't trust easily, and every step would be a test. But they couldn't afford to back down now. If they failed here, they might not get another chance. As the ship touched down, they were met by a group of Zorathian warriors, their towering forms covered in armored plates. They looked like living mountains, their eyes sharp and calculating. The leader of the group, a Zorathian named Theric, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Jonathan. "You come to us with empty promises, human," Theric growled. "What makes you think we will trust you?" Jonathan stepped forward, meeting Theric's gaze without hesitation. "We don't have empty promises. We have the future of the galaxy to fight for. If we don't stand together, we will fall one by one. This is your chance to be part of something bigger than yourselves." Theric studied him for a long moment, then looked to the others. The tension in the air was thick, but Jonathan stood his ground. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Theric nodded. "You speak with conviction, human. We will listen." It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. Jonathan had won the Zorathians' attention, and that was something. It was a dangerous game, but Jonathan was learning how to play it. He could feel the weight of the galaxy's future pressing on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The days after the meeting with the Zorathians were filled with uncertainty. While they had agreed to listen, it was clear that gaining their full trust would not be easy. Jonathan knew that this was only the beginning. He had to keep moving forward, gathering allies, one step at a time, or the galaxy would fall into chaos. The crew worked tirelessly to prepare for their next mission, the Gorthian Empire. The Gorthians were known for their ruthlessness and warlike nature. They had never shown any interest in peace talks, and Jonathan had heard stories of their cruelty. The thought of approaching them made him uneasy, but he knew it was necessary. As Jonathan walked through the colony's command center, he was met with the gaze of Captain Foster, who stood by a large map of the galaxy. "We're ready to go, Jonathan," Foster said, his voice cautious. "But are we ready for them? The Gorthians don't trust anyone, and their reputation precedes them." Jonathan paused for a moment, looking at the map. The Gorthian system was far beyond the Zorathian border, a place no one from the colony had ever ventured before. The thought of traveling there felt like a death sentence, but he couldn't show fear. Not now. He had a responsibility not just to his colony, but to the entire galaxy. "We'll go," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "But we'll need a plan. We don't have the luxury of making mistakes." Foster nodded and turned to his team. "We've been given a chance by the Zorathians, but the Gorthians will be a different kind of challenge. We'll need to show them we're serious, or they'll wipe us out without a second thought." Jonathan didn't say anything else. He knew the risks, and he knew the Gorthians would test them in ways they couldn't predict. As the team prepared to leave, Jonathan went to see Lyra. She had been quiet lately, watching everything from the sidelines. He could sense her worry. "Are you ready for the Gorthians?" Jonathan asked, standing in the doorway of her quarters. Lyra turned slowly, her pale blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light. "You don't need to worry about me," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of concern. "I am ready. But are you?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. He had been so focused on the mission that he hadn't fully considered what it meant to lead these people into battle, into the unknown. He had always been a leader, yes, but this was something else entirely. The fate of the galaxy was in his hands. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice quiet. Lyra took a step toward him, her expression softening. "You've already done more than most could ever hope for. But you're right. This is different. You will face challenges that will test your limits, but you are not alone. You have us. You have the Zorathians. And you have me." Jonathan looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the depth of what she meant. She wasn't just here to help. She was here because she believed in him. And that belief gave him the strength he needed. "Thank you," Jonathan said softly, feeling the weight of his responsibility lift just a little. The next day, the crew set out for the Gorthian system. The journey was long, and the tension between the crew members was palpable. But Jonathan kept his focus on the task ahead. He couldn't afford to let fear take control. As the Gorthian homeworld came into view, Jonathan stood at the front of the ship, his eyes fixed on the planet below. This was the moment. He was about to face the greatest challenge of his life, and he had to prove he was ready. The Gorthian homeworld loomed ahead as the crew prepared to land. Jonathan could feel the weight of the mission pressing on him, heavier than ever. The Zorathians had been the first to test his leadership, but the Gorthians were another matter entirely. Their reputation for being fierce and unyielding was well known throughout the galaxy. If Jonathan failed here, it could mean the end of their hopes for uniting the galaxy. As the ship descended into the atmosphere, Jonathan stood by the window, staring at the dark, jagged surface of the planet below. He knew that the Gorthians would test them in ways they couldn't predict. They didn't trust outsiders, and their history of violence against other races was legendary. "Captain Foster, any word from the Gorthians yet?" Jonathan asked, turning to the captain who stood at the controls. Foster glanced back, his face tense. "Not yet, but I'm not expecting a warm welcome. We'll need to be prepared for anything." Jonathan nodded, his jaw clenched. "We will be. We've come too far to back down now." The ship landed with a heavy thud, and the crew quickly assembled. The air outside was thick with the scent of metal and machinery, and the ground felt unstable under their feet. The Gorthian capital city was in the distance, a towering fortress of steel and stone that seemed to mock their presence. Jonathan knew they had to approach carefully. As they moved toward the city, A group of Gorthian soldiers appeared, their massive frames silhouetted against the dim sky. They were covered in thick armor, their eyes glowing red under their helmets. Their weapons were massive, and their stance was rigid, as if expecting trouble. "Stay close," Jonathan ordered, his voice low but firm. He could feel his heart pounding, but he refused to show fear. The Gorthians had to see him as strong, as capable. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. One of the Gorthian soldiers stepped forward, his voice deep and gravelly. "Human, you have crossed into our territory. State your purpose." Jonathan stepped forward, meeting the soldier's gaze without flinching. "We come in peace," he said, his voice steady. "We are here to discuss an alliance. The galaxy is facing a threat that we cannot ignore. We need to stand together, or we will fall separately." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "We do not trust outsiders. Your kind has always brought war, not peace." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He knew this was coming. The Gorthians had never been interested in peace, but he couldn't back down. "I understand your distrust. But this is different. This is not about us. This is about the future of the galaxy. You don't have to trust us, but you have to trust that if we don't unite, everything we fought for will be lost." The Gorthian soldier stood motionless for a long moment. Then, without warning, he turned and motioned for the others to follow. "You speak of truth, human. Follow us." Jonathan exhaled slowly, trying to hide the relief that washed over him. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. They were being allowed to speak, to present their case. That was more than he had hoped for. As they entered the Gorthian fortress, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den. The walls around them were lined with symbols of power, claws, weapons, and images of conquest. It was clear that the Gorthians were a proud people, and their history was one of domination. But Jonathan wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. This was his moment, the moment he had been preparing for since Lyra first spoke of the prophecy. He was the one who could unite the galaxy. He was the one who had to convince the Gorthians that peace was their only chance. The doors to the throne room opened, and Jonathan stepped inside. The Gorthian leader, a massive figure with sharp features and a stern expression, sat on a throne made of bone and stone. His gaze fixed on Jonathan, piercing and calculating. "Human," the leader growled. "You have come far to stand here, but you have not earned my trust. Tell me, why should we join you?" Jonathan took a deep breath, standing tall. "Because if we don't, we will all be destroyed. There is a force coming, something darker and more dangerous than anything we've ever faced. But together, we can stop it. You have the power, the strength to protect your people, but only if we stand united." The room was silent, and Jonathan could feel the weight of the Gorthian leader's gaze. For a moment, he wasn't sure if his words had made an impact. Then, slowly, the leader stood. "You speak with conviction, human," the Gorthian leader said. Perhaps there is something to your words." Jonathan held his breath, waiting for the verdict. The silence stretched on, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the leader nodded. "We will consider your offer." The Gorthian fortress was silent, the massive doors slowly closing behind Jonathan and his team. His heart was still racing from the tense meeting, but for the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel a sliver of hope. They had made it. The Gorthians had agreed to consider an alliance, a step toward uniting the galaxy. It wasn't the victory he had dreamed of, but it was progress. Jonathan stood on the platform outside the fortress, staring out at the horizon. The sky above was a deep purple, and the air felt thick with the weight of the moment. He had always dreamed of being a leader, but this was something far beyond what he had ever imagined. "We've done it," Captain Foster said, walking up beside him. "The Gorthians have agreed to talk. It's a huge step." Jonathan nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. The Gorthians weren't fully on their side yet. They hadn't promised anything, just agreed to consider the offer. He couldn't stop here. There was still so much to do. We need more than just their consideration, Jonathan replied. We need their commitment. The galaxy won't wait, and there are other factions we need to convince. Foster watched him carefully. You've come a long way, Jonathan. The Zorathians, the Gorthians, they've never worked together. Not like this. What you're trying to do is impossible. But it's possible, Jonathan interrupted, his voice firm. I know it is. We've come too far to fail now. The captain smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. Then let's make it happen. The crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase. With the Gorthians on the brink of joining, the task now was to maintain momentum. The next step would be to solidify the alliance and bring the other factions into the fold. Jonathan knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had come this far. He couldn't stop now. In the days that followed, Jonathan met with leaders from various races, each one more challenging than the last. Some were willing to listen, others were hostile, and a few simply didn't trust him. But slowly, one by one, he started to convince them. Every meeting felt like a small victory, and though he was exhausted, he pressed on. He had no choice. The future depended on it. Finally, after weeks of hard work, Jonathan stood before a large gathering of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. The room was filled with representatives from every faction. The Zorathians, the Gorthians, the Voltorians, and more. It was the first time in history that they had all come together in one place. The air was thick with anticipation. Jonathan stood at the front of the room, Lyra by his side. She had become more than just an ally. She was a trusted confidant, someone who believed in him when no one else did. He looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, but all there to hear what he had to say. I stand before you today, not as a leader of a single colony, Jonathan began, his voice strong and steady. I stand before you as a leader of all people. The galaxy is under threat. The forces that seek to destroy us are powerful, but together, we are stronger. It's time to unite. For the sake of our future. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. We cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford to be divided. We are the last hope for peace in this galaxy. If we stand together, we can defeat the darkness that threatens us all. For a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the leaders nodded. It wasn't unanimous, not yet, but the trust was there. They had heard his message, and they were starting to believe in it. Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. The prophecy has been fulfilled. Jonathan is the one who will lead us to victory. Together, we will build a new future. Jonathan felt a surge of emotion as the room slowly came to life with murmurs of agreement. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much work to be done. But this was a beginning. The first step toward a united galaxy. As Jonathan looked out over the gathered leaders, he knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun, but for the first time, he felt confident. They were on the right path, and together, they could face whatever the future held.